Kesubos Daf Samach Zayin discusses the dowry, the nadan that a woman brings into the marriage. There are two primary topics. There's one Mishnah. The first half of the daf will be discussing how we evaluate the value of the nadan that the husband has to write into the ksuba that he's going to return to her when the marriage ends. Then we get to the Mishnah, which introduces the topic of the minimum amount that has to be given by a father and how we support a poor person who cannot afford a dowry, and the Gemara will go into lengthy agadata about giving tzedakah in general. So we begin with a brief comment about the daughter of Nakdimin ben Gurion, who was very wealthy, but she lost her money and she ended up having to collect from the food on the floor. So the Gemara quotes a brisa where Rabbi Elazar Tzaddik says, he says, Erev benachama, I should see consolation. It's a language of shvu, a language of cursing himself, if the following isn't true, meaning to show the importance and the significance of what he's about to say. He says, I saw that she was gathering the barley grains from between the hooves of the horses in Akko. And he says, I applied to her a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, and says, it's a mashal for Klal Yisrael, and it says that you're walking, following the feet of the sheep in order to feed your goats. So he read it as Gidei Yisayach, he read it as Givei Yisayach, meaning your body, not the goats. And now the pasuk is saying that a woman is walking between the feet of animals in order to get food for her body. So that is the daughter of Nakdimin ben Gurion. That's where she was holding when she became so poor. She had to collect the barley from the floor between the feet of the horses. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go into materials that are brought into the marriage as the dowry. We had said that the husband has to write in the ksuba what the value of the dowry is, so that when the marriage ends, he gives it back to her. So we had said that there were two types of evaluations. The Gemara is going to now say that there are three. The Gemara is going to talk about things which don't fit in either category. So we said before, if she brings in cash, that is evaluated at 50% higher than its actual value. So if she brings in 1,000 zuz, he has to write that he got 1,500 zuz. And the reason for that is because it's easy to spend, it's easy to make money off it, and therefore he'll probably get more from it. However, if she brings kalim, those A, get worn out, and B, are often over-evaluated, and therefore he writes 20% less. So if she brings in 1,000 zuz worth of kalim, he writes 800 zuz. Now Gemara is going to talk about things which belong in one of these two categories, even though they aren't straight up cash or kalim. So first Gemara talks about zav, some gold. So if she brings in the gold, what is the halacha of gold? So the Gemara is going to spend a while on this and then talk about a few other things. Now, when we talk about the gold, there's three types of gold. There are gold kalim, that is actual utensils made out of gold. Then there's lumps of gold, and then there's gold coins. Gold coins would seem to be cash. Gold kalim, the Gemara makes clear, are not considered like other kalim. They don't get worn out, so you don't have to devalue them. And the main question is, what is the halacha of lumps of gold? Where it's not a coin, it's not a kli, it's just a piece of gold. So the Gemara quotes Rav Shlomo bar Abba and Rav Yochanan. It says that lumps of gold stay on their exact value. You don't have to overvalue them, you don't have to undervaluate them. And now the Gemara is going to have a number of kashas on this. So the Gemara brings a brisa, and the question is how to understand the brisa. We're going to have four ways of understanding the brisa. One of them will be a kasha on this halacha, and then the Gemara is going to try to answer it by having the other ones. So let's begin. So the brisa says as follows. The brisa says that zav, gold, is evaluated like kalim. So the Gemara says the pashas would be like kalim, which have to be undervalued. They have to be evaluated at 80% of their own value in the ksuba. So it seemed to be that the gold, meaning the lumps of gold, should be devalued the same way. So the Gemara says no. When it says that it's like kalim, it doesn't mean like other kalim. It means like gold kalim. Gold kalim are taken at their face value. They're not under or overvalued in the ksuba, and therefore lumps of gold are also not over or undervalued in the ksuba. So the Gemara says that can't be pshat in this brisa, and I'm going to show you that it's not pshat. First of all, it can't be pshat because if it's saying that lumps of gold are evaluated like kalim of gold, it should say like its kalim. It shouldn't say like kalim. It should say like its kalim, like kalim of gold. Second of all, we have to figure out the rest of the brisa, and this is a complex discussion. The Gemara is not going to have an answer for the lumps of gold, why it doesn't say it's gold. The Gemara will discuss that later after we go through the rest of the brisa. Now, the entire brisa reads as follows. You have a statement of a Tanakama, and you have a statement which appears to be Rav Shimon ben Gamliel arguing. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out what type of gold are we referring to here. So the Tanakama says two things. First of all, he says that gold is like kalim. That's what we've just discussed. The second thing he says is that gold coins are like silver coins. They count as cash, and therefore they have to be over-evaluated. Okay, so two statements. Lumps of gold are like kalim. The Gemara wants to say that means like regular kalim that should be undervalued. The Gemara wants to say no, it's like gold kalim which are exact valued. And then the gold coins, which he says are like regular coins and have to therefore be overvalued. So Gemara, Shimon ben Gamliel argues, and he says that a place where you can't spend them, you evaluate them at their face value. Now, which of the two statements of the Tanna Kama is he referring to? So let's try. The Gemara's kasha is very simple. He can't be referring to the second statement, where we said that that the gold coins are considered to be cash and they have to be overvalued, because he said that if you can't spend them, meaning in a place where they're not acceptable currency, then you have to evaluate them at face value. Now, the Tanna Kama would argue on that. The Tanna Kama would say that if you can't spend them, you have to overvalue them. That doesn't make sense. If Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is going on the second phrase of the Brisa, and he's talking about gold coins, and the Tanna Kama then was saying that gold coins, whether you could spend them or not, have to be considered cash and they're overvalued, and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, if you can't spend them, then they are taken at face value. That doesn't make sense. How could the Tanna Kama possibly say that even in a place where they're not acceptable currency, you still have to overvaluate them like coins? That doesn't make sense. So therefore, we have to reread this brisa. So the Gemara's first proposal is to say that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is going on the first statement of the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama's first statement was that gold lumps count like kalim, and on that, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said no, they don't count like kalim, because you can't do anything with them, and therefore they're taken at face value. So the Tanna Kama wasn't saying they're taken at face value. So what was the Tanna Kama saying? He was saying that they're like kalim and they have to be undervalued. He wasn't saying they're like gold kalim. He was saying they're like silver kalim, like kalim of other material. Otherwise, no machlekes. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is saying they are like things that you can't, since you can't spend them, you take their face value. It means the Tanna Kama was not saying face value, which is what we were trying to propose before. The Tanna Kama must have been saying that they're like kalim, not gold kalim, which are at face value, at other kalim, which have to be undervalued. And therefore, we've proven that the Tanna Kama holds that they have to be undervalued. Kasha Rav Yechon, who said that lumps of gold are valued at face value. Now, he fits with Shimon Gamliel, but he does not fit with the Tanna Kama. So the Gemara is going to say that there's other ways of understanding this. You don't have to explain the brisa this way, and I'm going to explain you two other ways, for starters, of understanding it. Way number one is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is arguing on the second statement of the Tanna Kama, and they're talking about coins where they're accepted as currency under pressing circumstances. Nobody really wants it for currency, but it's possible to get it used as currency. Now, the Tanna Kama says that gold coins count as coins because since you could spend them, so they're spendable. It's hard, but you can do it, and therefore it counts as coins, and it should be overvalued. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says since it's hard to spend them, they don't count as coins, and they should be taken at face value. They should not be overvalued. And therefore, he's not talking about the first case at all. In the first case, the Tanna Kama was saying simply that lumps of gold counts as gold kalim, and they're taken at face value, just like Rav Yochanan said. Now, the Gemara's second explanation is that there's no machlokas here at all. And Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is the Tanna Kama, and it's one long statement, and we just have to reread it a little bit. And we read it as follows. The Tanna Kama, who's Shimon ben Gamliel, says gold lumps count like kalim. They count like gold kalim, which means they count as things which are taken at face value. Lumps of gold kalim are taken at face value. What about gold coins? So then he says those are like cash as long as you could spend them. If you can't spend them, he continues and he says in a place where you can't spend them, then they count as lumps of gold. They're not coinage, and therefore you take it at face value. And Rav Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, in a place where you can't spend them, then they're taken at face value. All fits together. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is just telling us about the three different types of kalim, three different types of gold, that is, and it all fits with what Rav Yochanan was saying. Bottom line, it's all taken at face value except for coins which you could spend. All right, now the Gemara says I have to go back to my old kasha. I told you it should have said they are like its kalim if it was referring to gold kalim. So obviously we're not talking about that. The Gemara says that's a kasha, or I'll tell you a fourth pshat, and that's this entire Mishnah, this entire brisa that is talking about gold chips or gold dust. It's not talking about any of the things. It's not talking about gold lumps. It's not talking about gold kalim. It's not talking about gold coins. It's talking about chips or dust. And the halacha of those is that they are not really spendable, and therefore this is different than what we were referring to, and they do get devalued, they get lost, and therefore you have to go down in value. And that's what was being said here, and is not a kasha on Rav Yochanan, who was talking about gold lumps, which don't have to be devalued at all. All right, now the Gemara moves on to talk about other types of materials that count and don't have to be devalued. They don't fit into their category neatly. So the Gemara says that Rav Yanai says that besamim, spices in Antiochia, in the city of Antioch, over there, they are the main commodity there, and therefore they're very easy to sell. So they count as cash, because they're easy to sell, and they should be overvalued. Shmuel bar Nachmani says the same is true for Arabian camels. She gets extra for them as well. Now, says Rav Papi, the same is true for the clothing of Mechasi, and the sacks of Rudia, and the ropes of Kimchunya. They're all the main commodity there, and therefore it counts as cash. Now the Gemara brings another halacha. Rava says that I used to think that the money bags in Mechuzah, those count as land. What does that mean? Generally, the halacha is that a woman collects her ksuba from nechasim mishubadim, from property that has a lien on it, and if the property is sold, she gets to take it away from the buyer. So that is generally because people use land as a security for their loans, and that's what the woman's relying on to be able to collect. Says Rava, in Mechuzah, where most people are merchants, money is the main commodity, and people rely on money. There's always cash around. This place has lots of cash, and therefore the women are relying on that. Now, Rava says that's what I used to say, because I assumed the women relied on the cash, not on land. Then I saw that the women there, as soon as they get cash, they go buy land because they want to have land. They don't rely on the cash. So now I see they're not really relying on the cash. They're really relying on land. And I said they should collect from land and not from cash. All right, this takes us to the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses, first of all, the minimum requirements for the dowry, and second of all, what to do with poor people who can't afford it. So the Gemara first says that a father, if he does not set aside a specific amount for the dowry for his daughter, the standard amount is 50 zuz. The Gemara says this is referring to 50 standard zuz, not 50 tsurian zuz, which are 8 times more valuable. Now, if he doesn't give her anything, if he says to the husband, I'm not giving her anything, I'm sending her with nothing. So the husband then has to give her. Now, the 50 zuz are designed to buy her clothing. It's a year's worth of clothing supply. So the husband is then his responsibility to provide clothing for her. So the husband may come to the father and say, you got to dress her, at least you have to provide her with her initial clothing allowance before the marriage. I mean, she comes at least with clothing from you. I don't have to give her until she lives by me for a while. On that, the Mishnah says it's not true. The husband has to give her initial clothing allowance. He has to come to her while she's still living in her father's house and give her the clothing that she needs to come to the wedding respectfully. A year's supply of clothing worth 50 zuz. He cannot make the father pay for that initial thing. The father said, I'm not giving anything. That's it. He doesn't have to give anything. Now, what happens with a poor girl who's an orphan, the Gemara says, who cannot afford anything? So again, the standard amount is 50 zuz. If somebody's marrying off an orphan, he has to give her 50 zuz worth. And if there's a charity fund that can afford it, then the charity fund has to give 50 zuz worth. Says the Gemara, that's how we know when we say 50 zuz, we're talking about standard common zuz. We're not talking about high-level tsurian zuz, because we would not take high-level tsurian zuz, and that amount is 8 times more valuable, so it equals 400 zuz. We wouldn't take that amount from the charity fund. Right, now the Gemara goes into the halachos of supporting Yesomim, and then we'll get into a lengthy Agadata about tzedakah. So the Gemara says, first of all, if you have a orphan boy and an orphan girl who both come to be fed, you have to give priority to the girl because it is difficult for her to collect. Men, the boys, it's easier for them to knock on doors. Now, if they both come for wedding expenses, they're not marrying each other, but they both want to get married, again, you have to give priority to the girl because it is harder for her to collect, and her embarrassment, her need is greater, she takes priority. Next, the Gemara quotes the pasuk Dei Machzor Asher Yachsolo, which is our commandment to give tzedakah, to give charity, to support people who can't afford things. So the Gemara says, first of all, we'll have two ways of expounding this. The first one comes from a brisa. The brisa says it's referring to a yasum, an orphan who wants to get married. So we first give him a house, then we give him furniture. We give him the bed and the kalim that he needs, and then we go find him a wife. Where do you see that? So Dei Machzor refers to a house, Asher Yechzar refers to the bed and the table, the furnishings, and Loi, that's to him, that refers to that we find him a wife, as it says, Esa Loi Ezer Kenegdoi. And Loi therefore refers to having a helpmate, having a wife. Second shot in this pasuk is a different brisa, and that it teaches me you have to give a person what he's accustomed to having. You have to give him tzedakah up to the amount that he's used to, which causes him as much pain. If he doesn't have it, as less would cause to a lesser person who is used to having less. Where do you see that? So Dei Machzoro means you have to give him the tzedakah to support him. We don't have to make him rich, but Asher Yachzar Lo means what's lacking to him, what he's lacking. So if he's used to more and he's now lacking it, it should be provided to him as part of the mitzvah of tzedakah. Even if he needs a horse to ride and an eved, a servant, to run in front of him just to call out, here comes the great guy, you got to do that as well. Gemara says Hillel HaZaken would support a certain person who was poor but came from a very wealthy family, and he got him a horse to ride and a servant to run in front of him. It was one time he couldn't find any servant to do it, so he himself ran in front of the guy for a distance of 3 mil. All right, now the Gemara is going to bring a number of stories about people who were supported on a higher level than the standard. So the Gemara's first story is a brisa that says that the people of the Galil Ha'elyon, the upper Galil, once supported a poor person who came from a wealthy family from Tzipori. They gave him a litra, a measure of meat every day. Now the Gemara asks, a litra is not that much. A litra is about 14 ounces of meat. That's not a lot for a whole day. So the Gemara says, no, it is a lot. And there's a couple different ways of understanding this. Either it's referring to very expensive meat. It's referring to a certain type of fowl that was very expensive, and most people wouldn't afford that much. Or it's talking about real meat. But it's not that the meat measured 14 ounces. The money that they spent was 14 ounces of silver in order to buy meat, which is a much larger amount of meat. And the third shot is that it wasn't that much meat, but they had to shech the whole animal for him every day, and the animal went to waste because there was nothing else to do with the meat. It was a small village and no one else needed it. So they ended up having to give him fresh meat, an entire animal's worth every day. Now the Gemara brings another story. Somebody came in front of Rav Nechemia, and he was asking for support. Rav Nechemia said, what are you used to eating? He said, I always ate fatty meat and old wine. So he said, listen, I can't afford that, but if you want, you can join me for my meal of lentils. So without a choice, he sat down and he ate him at his meal of lentils, and it was not enough for him, and he died. So Rav Nechemia said, oy vey on this person, that Nechemia killed him. He said about himself that he killed this guy. So he obviously felt bad about it, but the Gemara says he didn't feel bad enough. He shouldn't say oy on the person. He should say oy on me, oy on Nechemia, that I killed somebody. So he says no, it wasn't. He's not held responsible to that extent. This person was not born into a wealthy family. He just got himself used to expensive tastes. It's therefore his fault, and he's not really entitled to that level of support. Next story, the Gemara says there was somebody came in front of Rava, and he needed support, and again he was in a similar situation. Rava said, what are you used to eating? He said, I ate a fattened hen and old wine. So he said, why did you get yourself used to this level of food? Don't you realize you're oppressing the tzibur? You're causing a big drain on the public funds. So the person answered it. He said, you think it's their money? I'm not taking their money. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who gives me support. They're the ones who are privileged to help out. Like the pasuk says, everyone's eyes turns to you, Hashem, and you give them their food in His time. It says in His time. It doesn't say in their time. It doesn't give them all at once. He gives them each one in his own personal time that's best for him. So you see, he gives an individual consideration to each individual, and he's the one who's giving me what I need. I'm not burdening anybody. Now, as they were talking, Rava got a visit from a sister who hadn't come to visit him for 13 years, and she brought him a gift, which was, lo and behold, a fattened hen and old wine. Rava said, look at this. He was shocked by what happened. He saw the obvious Yata Dishmaya that this person had received, and he said, this is obviously for you. I spoke too harshly to you, sit down and eat. And it was almost as if Rava was his guest, because Rava only got this in honor of the fact that this person was used to it, and this is what he deserved, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided it for him. All right, now the Gemara brings a series of brises that discuss what happens if somebody doesn't want to get support, what happens if somebody wants support and he doesn't deserve it. So first of all, somebody who doesn't want to get support. He's poor, we know he's poor, he needs support, but he's not approaching the tzedakah to ask. So Gemara brings three statements, three opinions in brises as to what we should do for him. So the Tanakama, who is Rabbi Meir, so he says we should give him as a loan so that he feels like he's being lent money. It's not a gift. And then we'll just never collect it from him. We'll turn it into a gift. The Chachamim say first give it to him as a gift and then turn it as a loan. The Gemara means we should first consider the possibility that although he's not willing to come and ask, if we offer it to him, he'll take it as a gift. Shouldn't go right away and offer it to him as a loan. First offer it as a gift. Then see if he accepts that. If he doesn't accept that, then we should go ahead and give it to him as a loan and just never collect it. Now the Gemara then brings it Reb Shimon. He says we should go as far as to give him as to take a mashkon from him. We should make him feel like he's going to pay back. We'll take a collateral in order that he should really feel good and feel like we're not giving him a gift at all. Now, what happens if you have the opposite case? Someone who has enough money to support himself, but he doesn't support himself. He wants to take charity. So there's two approaches to this. The Gemara's first approach, brought in a brisa, is that we give it to him as a gift. We tell him, we're giving you, but then we collect it back from him. We turn it into a loan. Opposite of what we did before. Hashem says we don't get involved with him at all. We turn him away empty-handed. We don't take anything. Says the Gemara, these two cases are what is learned out of the pasuk Ha'avei Tavitenu. It tells us to lend money. So it says, lend you shall lend him. So what's the two phrases? So the Gemara says the first one is referring to somebody who needs tzedakah, but he doesn't want to take it, so we should lend it to him as a loan and then just turn it into a gift and never collect it from him. Now, Tavitenu is a machokis. So the first approach is that it refers to somebody who has and doesn't want. He wants to take tzedakah. He doesn't want to support himself. And that's telling us, according to the opinion, says we should do so, that we should first give it to him as a gift and then collect it from him. Going to the other approach, that we just stay away from him, we ignore him, then is no limit here at all. This is just a standard way people speak. It's an expression, Havei Tavitenu, that people talk. Now the Gemara goes into the famous stories of Mar Ukva. So Mar says Mar Ukva had a poor person in his neighborhood that he would give him every day. He would put 4 zuz in the hole of his door hinge. The way hinges worked in the days of Chazal was there were a peg that came out of the bottom of the door and went into a hole in the ground. This guy had a big hole over there, and he would put the 4 coins in the hole. Now, he always did it in secret, so the person wouldn't know who he was. And then one day, the person wanted to find out who he was, so he stayed behind to try to watch and see who puts the money there. And Mar Ukva was late that day. He spent extra time in the base medrash. It was at night, and therefore his wife went with him. As we will see, that it was a very propitious event that his wife went with him. Anyway, as soon as the poor person saw them starting to move the door to put the coins in the hole, he came out to see who they were, and they ran away. So they fled from him for a while until they needed a place to hide. They hid in an oven. And the oven the fire was out, there were coals on the floor, and they stood there. Now, Mrs. Ukva's was fine, but Mar Ukva's feet began to burn. So she said to him, put your feet upon my feet so that they won't be on the floor, on the coals. Now, Mar Ukva was upset at himself that he didn't have the merits to be fine like his wife did. And she said, don't worry about it. It's because I'm at home, and therefore there are more poor people who come to me, and also I give them bread that they could eat right away, while you give them money that they need to go and spend. Asks the Gemara, why did they go so far as to jump into an oven? Seems a little extreme. The Gemara answers, because a person has to jump into an oven rather than embarrass himself, rather than embarrass someone else. The Gemara brings a list of people who learned it out from Tamar, who allowed herself to be almost thrown into a fire she would have allowed herself to be all the way thrown into a fire and not embarrass Yehuda for the Maisa that he did, not accuse him of what he did. Next story of Mar Ukva is that there was a poor person in his neighborhood that he would send him 400 zuz once a year, every Erev Yom Kippur. He would send it with his son. So one year he sent it with his son. The son came back and said he doesn't need it. He says, how do you know you don't need it? He said, I saw that they were sprinkling old wine around his house to make it smell good. That's a luxury. So Mar Ukva said, really? He's used to such frills. He obviously needs much more money, and he sent back the original 400 plus another 400 because he needs twice as much. Now, when Mar Ukva was on his deathbed, he said, bring me my accounting of how much tzedakah I gave. He read there and he saw that he had given 7,000 si'anki dinarim, an exorbitant amount. That's how much he gave over his lifetime. But he said it's not enough. The way is long. The road I'm traveling from here is long, and I packed light. So therefore he went and he gave away half of all his possessions to tzedakah. So that way he split it, half for tzedakah, half for his Yarshim. Somebody asks, how is he allowed to do that? We said, if Eloi says in Usha, they made a Tekani, you can only give away a fifth of your money to tzedakah, not more. So my answer is that's while you're alive. Once he's about to die, there's no longer any problem of having to be supported by anybody else, and therefore he's allowed to give it all away. Now, Rabbi Abba would wrap coins in a scarf and he would sling it over his back. That way poor people could come and take it, and he wouldn't know who they were. That was a form of chesed to give confidentially, but he would keep his eyes out for cheats who would come and steal it. He made sure that didn't happen. He was able to slant his eyes and see who they were. He was to see enough that they weren't cheating him, but not to see the identity of the poor people that were there.